From the outside, you look intact, capable, functional. You even know the right words: trauma, healing, inner child, awareness. But somewhere beneath the surface, there's a fracture that logic can't reach. You've dissected your thoughts, mapped your behaviors, diagnosed your wounds like a surgeon of the self. Yet the pain still lingers. It shifts forms, hides in shadows, bleeds into silence. Because what breaks you was never logical to begin with, and what heals you won't be either. You can't outthink what was never built in thought. You confuse clarity with control. You believe that if you can name it, you can tame it. That if you understand your patterns, you're free from them. But the map isn't the terrain, and insight isn't escape. You may know exactly why you shut down in love, or sabotage your joy, or flinch at softness, but that knowing doesn't melt the freeze. You can trace the origins of your fear all the way back to the first betrayal, the first dismissal, the first quiet abandonment, and still feel paralyzed when someone gets too close. Logic draws lines around the wound, but it doesn't touch the flesh. You want to be clean, measured, coherent. You want your healing to make sense. You want your pain to obey reason. But suffering is not a puzzle. It's a presence, a haunting. A slow burn in the body that resists the tidy categories of intellect. It doesn't respond to insight the way you wish it would. And so you stack theories like armor, quoting philosophers to hide the fact that you still can't cry when it counts. You speak of Jung and shadows, but avoid your own darkness like a plague. You talk of ego death, but still flinch when your mask cracks in public. You can explain everything. And yet, none of it really moves. So much of you was shaped before memory. Your nervous system learned the world before your mind ever could. You were held or not, heard or not, touched or not. These were not thoughts, they were truths, encoded in breath, in posture, in tone. Before you ever formed beliefs, you learned how to survive. And that survival still governs you, silently. So when you try to fix yourself with logic, you're asking your intellect to undo what your body decided long ago was necessary. You're asking your neocortex to undo what your nervous system calls safety. And it won't. Not until it's felt. Not until it's met. You keep looking for the right frame, the right book, the right breakthrough. You want a sentence to click so hard it rewires you. But the deeper parts of you don't speak in sentences. They speak in sensation, in reaction, in energy. You can't talk your way out of trauma. You can't reason your way into trust. Because trust isn't built in the head. It's built in the gut, in the slow, shaky moments where you don't run, in the quiet decision to stay, to feel, even when it doesn't make sense. The need for logic is a need for control. And the need for control is the fear of being undone, of falling apart, of facing what doesn't have an answer. So you cling to concepts like lifeboats. You label your dysfunctions like you're organizing a library of pain. But pain doesn't care about your categories. It wants to be felt, not filed. And healing isn't a thesis. It's a collapse, a death of certainty, a surrender into the unknown where your intellect has no map. You were taught that reason is power, that if you can stay above it, stay sharp, stay rational, you won't drown. But some truths are tidal. They rise through the floor of your being. They pull you under. And it's only by drowning that you learn how to breathe again, not with logic, but with presence, with the parts of you that feel ancient, animal, wordless. You think you're broken because you can't fix yourself with thought. But maybe you're only broken because you keep trying. Maybe your healing lives somewhere deeper, beneath the analysis, beneath the story, beneath the mind's grasping. Maybe what's wrong is not your pain, but your refusal to touch it without dissecting it, to sit with it without naming it, to let it scream, tremble, ache without rushing in to explain. The mind is brilliant. It gives structure to chaos. But it also lies. It tells you you're above the body. That feeling is weakness. That clarity must come through cognition. And so you try to think your way back to wholeness. But wholeness was never lost in thought. It was lost in the places you refused to feel, the nights you went numb, the softness you buried, the grief you postponed. And so, even now, you live in two worlds, the one you can explain, and the one that still haunts you. And until those two worlds touch, until your body becomes a place you can trust, you'll keep mistaking insight for freedom. You'll keep chasing the right idea instead of surrendering to the right moment, and logic will keep you safe. But it will not make you whole. You've been trained to chase coherence, to make your story make sense, to wrap your pain in language so neatly that no one sees the mess underneath. You call it self-awareness. You call it growth. But much of it is disguise, a mask made of insight. You speak fluently about your defenses, but you still use them. You name your trauma, but you still fear the silence it left behind. You want to narrate your healing as if it were a novel, linear, refined, under control. But real healing is feral. It doesn't follow your logic, it tears through your systems. And it asks you to become something your intellect cannot predict, because the deeper wound isn't in what happened, it's in the shape you had to take to survive it. You didn't just suffer, you split, you shrank. You bent yourself around the absence. You became palatable to escape rejection. You became selfless to stay safe. You learned to mirror others instead of feeling yourself. And now you want to return to your original form through theory. But theory doesn't stretch the muscle back. It doesn't breathe life into the abandoned self. You have to feel your way back. You have to crawl through the memory, not just name it. There's a reason why your intellect is sharp. It's been your shield, a way to stay above the chaos, a way to translate threat into order. And it worked for a time. It let you survive what couldn't be felt. But now it's become your ceiling. A glass box that keeps you intact, but also trapped. Because every time you try to figure it out, you bypass the fire, the raw, unfiltered storm that wants to be seen, not solved. And you wonder why nothing changes. Why your revelations feel hollow. Why your breakthroughs fade. It's because you're speaking to a wound that doesn't speak your language. There are parts of you that don't care about logic. They want to scream, to shake, to sob until the tension leaves your bones. They want to feel what they weren't allowed to feel. And until they do, they will keep hijacking your clarity. You will keep collapsing after insight. You will keep circling the same patterns, dressed in different words. Not because you're weak, but because you're still trying to outthink what needs to be outlived. The mind wants to know. The heart wants to be held. And the body wants to release. But you've been trained to let the mind lead everything, to make it the judge, the healer, the interpreter, and so your healing stays conceptual, detached, safe. Safe. But disembodied healing isn't healing, it's performance. It's theater. It might sound enlightened, but it doesn't touch the soul. It doesn't reach the parts of you that still wake up clenched, that still flinch at softness, that still brace in moments of peace because they don't believe peace can last. You say you want to change, but what you often mean is you want to change without discomfort. You want to feel different without having to dissolve. But real change asks for death. The death of the identity you built to protect yourself. The death of the narrative that kept you righteous. The death of the logic that let you avoid feeling. And no part of that process is clean. No part of it can be mapped. It's messy, frightening, divine. Sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is stop trying to understand, to let the mystery be what it is, to feel without forming a sentence, to weep without explaining why, to tremble and not turn it into content, to let your body teach you the truths your mind has buried. And in that surrender, something ancient awakens, a clarity that doesn't come from comprehension, but from contact, from presence, from the raw aliveness of being here without a script. Because healing isn't a concept. It's a return, a homecoming to the parts of you abandoned when feeling became dangerous. And that return isn't logical, it's sacred, it's slow. It's non-verbal, it's something you become, not something you understand. So if you still feel broken even after all your knowledge, it's not because you're failing, it's because the deeper work is still waiting. Waiting for you to stop thinking and start listening. Listening to the part of you that never needed to be fixed, only felt, only loved, only met in the raw, unspeakable truth of your experience. Without logic, without analysis, without a plan, just presence, just breath, just the unbearable grace of being real. You've mistaken control for safety, mistaken knowledge for liberation. But some cages are made of clarity, some prisons are padded with logic. And the tighter you hold on to reason, the more distant you become from the very parts of you that need your presence the most. You rationalize your grief. You diagnose your resistance. You categorize your numbness like symptoms in a textbook. But what if those states aren't problems? What if they're protests? What if your mind's endless processing is just a way to avoid the one thing that actually transforms, feeling? You want to be efficient in your healing. You want to skip the chaos, bypass the mess. But healing isn't a clean operation. It's an exorcism. It doesn't ask for your competence. It asks for your surrender. And that's terrifying. Because surrender means giving up the illusion that you're in charge, that you can think your way out of despair, that you can understand your pain so completely that it no longer hurts. But pain doesn't disappear when it's understood. It only disappears when it's finally allowed to be. And that's the paradox you live inside. The more you chase resolution, the further you drift from integration. Because integration doesn't come from understanding why you broke. It comes from learning how to live as the one who broke and still breathes, still stands, still feels, even when nothing makes sense, especially when nothing makes sense. That's not logical, that's alchemical. There is a part of you that remembers, not with thoughts, but with pulses. A part that knows what it's like to be untouched by explanation. That remembers how to howl, how to tremble, how to release what words could never contain. You've spent years silencing that part, polishing it, explaining it away, making it digestible for others so they'd never have to face their own discomfort around your rawness. But healing begins when you stop apologizing for that part. When you stop narrating your pain and start inhabiting it. Because you've made pain into a story, a neat arc, a set of causes and effects, a map you can point to when people ask why you are the way you are. But pain isn't a story, it's a presence, and it doesn't need to be understood, it needs to be honored, felt fully, held without question, until it softens, until it teaches you how to live without the armor. You speak often of self-awareness, but awareness without embodiment is surveillance. You've become the watcher, the analyst, the inner detective, constantly scanning yourself for fault lines. But who's holding the one being watched? Who's breathing with the one under the microscope? You can't heal through scrutiny. You can only heal through contact, through the slow, unspoken act of letting yourself exist without explanation. The truth is this: the wound you carry isn't just in what happened to you, it's in how you learn to treat yourself in the aftermath, with analysis instead of affection, with logic instead of love. You dissected yourself to survive. You became your own observer because it was safer than being your own companion. But you're not here to remain a case study. You're here to return to yourself, to belong to your own bones again. Not because you figured everything out, but because you finally stopped needing to. You will not think your way home. You will not logic yourself into wholeness. You will not organize your feelings into neat compartments and call that healing. The path forward is not linear, it's not rational, it's not even clear. It's messy, sacred, and slow. It asks you to touch the places that scare you. To breathe where you once held your breath, to stay present when every part of you wants to run. And in that staying, something shifts. Not a grand epiphany, not a sudden resolution, but a quiet unfolding, a warmth in the cold, a crack in the armor, a whisper from within. You're here now, and that's enough, not because you've solved yourself, but because you've finally dared to feel yourself, without needing to fix it, without needing it to make sense, just raw, just real. Just you. There is a moment in every journey where the old tools stop working, where insight becomes noise and explanation becomes avoidance. You try to go deeper with sharper thoughts, more accurate frameworks, more refined language. But the soul doesn't respond to refinement, it responds to reverence. And reverence doesn't come from knowing, it comes from meeting. From standing before your own wound without flinching, without reaching for the nearest theory, without making it a project. Just standing, just feeling, just being. This is where the intellect surrenders. Not because it failed, but because it reached its edge. It brought you as far as it could. It helped you see, it helped you name, but it cannot touch. The touching happens somewhere else, in the breath, in the belly, in the places that never learned to speak in words. This is where you begin to realize your healing won't arrive as a thought. It will arrive as a shift, subtle, somatic, uncontrolled. It will happen in the places you used to avoid, in the pauses, in the breakdowns, in the trembling that you used to escape with logic. Because your pain was never intellectual, it was relational. It was the absence of being met, the absence of being seen without being studied. So every time you turn your attention inward with judgment or analysis, you recreate the very dynamic that hurt you. You look at your younger self not with compassion but with critique, not with presence, but with plans. You try to manage your wounds like tasks, but wounds are not tasks, they're thresholds, and they require something rare, unconditional attention. This is what you were never taught, that some parts of you do not need to be changed. They need to be witnessed, held in a silence thick with acceptance. No fixing, no framing, just presence. And that kind of presence is unbearable at first, because it exposes everything the mind tried to control. All the terror, all the helplessness, all the grief buried beneath understanding. And yet, in that exposure, something begins, something ancient, something real. You've been told that healing is a process of becoming something better. But what if healing is a return, a remembering, a shedding of everything that was added on top of your essence? What if you're not becoming whole, but realizing you were never anything else? That every defense, every distortion, every compulsive need to explain, it was all built around a core that never stopped glowing. You don't need to fix that core, you need to feel it again, and feeling can't be done through thought. You keep looking for the final insight, the ultimate realization that will collapse your suffering in an instant. But suffering doesn't collapse through logic, it dissolves through intimacy, through the long, slow relearning of trust. Trust in your body, trust in your signals, trust in the wisdom beneath the noise. And that trust builds one moment at a time. When you stop running, when you stop explaining, when you breathe and simply let yourself exist. This isn't the path you were promised. It doesn't come with clarity. It doesn't make for clean stories. It's not easily articulated, but it's real. And what's real is often invisible to the mind. It's found in the quiver of the chest when you speak a truth you've buried, in the stillness after a sob you didn't analyze, in the deep exhale after decades of holding in. You will not be saved by knowledge. You will not be repaired by theory. You will not be purified by perfect logic. The salvation you seek is more primal than that, more honest. It's in your rawness, your rage, your grief, your surrender. It's in the parts of you that were never allowed to surface, the wildness you learned to fear, the softness you learned to hide, the sacred chaos of simply being. And so, the next time you try to explain your pain, pause. The next time you analyze your sadness, breathe. Let it speak in its own language. Let it move through you. Don't trap it in thoughts. Don't cage it in categories. Trust that your body knows the way. Trust that your soul remembers. Even when you don't. Especially when you don't.